Today, my wife and I are visiting Colonial Williamsburg, an amazing living history museum in Virginia that tells the early part of America's enduring story. Come along with me and my wife as we explore a history buff's paradise. That's coming up next.
Perfectly frank with you all, I did not come to the capital city with any frequency when my first husband passed, as my duties to the estate grew exponentially. My first husband left no will and no guidance as to how to manage the vast estate. Now, I'm sure some of you are thinking that would spell tragedy, but in fact, I understood that my estate would be taken care of under that of English common law, as we all enjoy the freedoms and liberties of being Englishmen. And thus, I understood that as a widow, I would receive a right to 1/3 to 1/2 of my deceased husband's estate. 1/2 if there are no surviving children, 1/3 or no less than you would give a child if there are surviving children. And in effect, it were quite simple for us, for there was myself and my 2 children. 1/3 for me, 1/3 for my daughter, and 1/3 for my son. Now, of course, my son, being the sole heir of the Custis estate, receives 2/3 of the properties. My daughter's third comes in the form of stocks and bonds in London. But my third comprised of all of the various elements. Property, both real and personal, as well as bonds and monies from London. And when the entirety of the estate were given to me, the very first thing that I had to do was engage in legal assistance. For the Custis estate is quite vast, my friends. It comprises of over 17,768 acres spread over 6 counties. And thus each and every acreage, each and every inch of that property had to be inventoried by different probate inventory people in each of the 6 counties. And so, while I might not have come to the capital with any frequency, my representatives did, spending the majority of the time in that building just there, or that building down there, as the Custis estate was so large that it attracted the attention of the Governor's Council, and indeed the Treasurer of Virginia, Mr. Nicholas, assisted me in many of the financial burden that were now placed upon me. And I will be frank with you, friends, my mother did not educate me how to manage such a vast estate. She educated myself and my sisters to manage the house, as I'm sure it was expected that my husband would always be there to manage the outside of the house. And as I mentioned to you but a moment ago, I'm sure it was always my mother's intention that she would be widowed long before I, and thus she could educate us on the laws that protect widows from her own experience. But my father died 6 months after my own husband, and thus we were engaged in understanding our new place in the law together. However, I had a significant disadvantage than my mother, for all of my siblings were grown, and in fact assisting my mother, my children were ages 3 and 2 when their father passed away, and under the English common law considered orphans at the passing of their father. And so thus not only I became the administratrix of the estate, but I became the legal guardian of my children. And it took a great deal of time, for I felt a new sense of responsibility, being a Custis, in ensuring the legacy that my son and my daughter would one day inherit. And so I spent the vast majority of my time out in New Kent, And I had no intentions of remarrying, I will be perfectly frank with you. I was quite happy to be the widow Custis rattling around in my old house. For of course I had every vision of a gothic romance novel when thinking of myself. But of course, my best laid plans have always been upended. And I was very quickly upended on that one as well. Well, not so quickly, but according to my mother, it was not fast enough. But regardless, that's another topic. Speaking of my mother, I apologize, friends. Would you engage in a bit of mischief with me this morning? Sure. It's nothing illegal. There is a house in the next block that is of particular interest to my mother. And I understand that it has recently undergone some improvements. That my mother will chastise me if I return back to New Kent and not give her a very detailed explanation of what has happened to it. And so thus, I thought perhaps if we could be very subtle about it as a group of 17, to walk by it and observe very subtly without disturbing the people within. Would that be all right with you all? Mm-hmm. Yes. I promise it's not illegal. And perhaps we could even check the garden behind to see if the tulips are growing.
Okay.
Here, come with me, friends.
Well, that's a wrap for this Colonial Williamsburg video. I hope you really enjoyed it, getting to see another part of this amazing living history museum. If you like this sort of stuff, check out my other videos. Check out colonialwilliamsburg.org to plan your own visit here, because it's so much cooler in real life than it is on film. Till next time, this is History Buff, TN Photobug signing out, and I'm having a blast with the past.